I'm just chatting up with our friends here. I love this, Ben. This is my favorite thing about doing these Zooms is connecting with everybody, on the chat in the little chat box. So I will try to not type over anyone speaking.
Well, mine is having excellent guests. So, Tom, you're just here to get us to be able to chat with our friends.
All right,
Hey,
Tom.
that's a good reason to be here, to be
It
honest with
is.
you.
These Sunday nights are great. So, Tom, and we're gonna just get right into it. And just we're taping this, so, and we'll edit it tonight. Gary Fletcher will edit it tonight. And so, if there's something you think about that you wish you didn't say or you wish you said differently, let us know, and we'll just take it out. No big deal.
But good to know all the career-ending stuff will. And is this are you guys doing just video or audio later?
We're doing audio for the podcast. Video is just here tonight for our patrons.
Okay, good. Okay, got it.
Tom Nichols, welcome to the Road to Now.
Thanks for having me.
We are thrilled to have you. There's so many things I want to get to tonight, and I know Ben wants to get to, but I want to start with a article you had in the USA Today a couple weeks ago. Ben and I had comedian Trey Crowder on, and we framed the interview around your article in the Atlantic about Trump being the most unmanly president. Well, I'd like to start with you tonight about the USA Today article from early June. Keep Trump on Twitter. Each indefensible tweet is a reminder of the stakes this fall. And what's fascinating about the article is you raise some, of course, these are really great points about why we need Trump on Twitter, as much as it drives a lot of anxiety and anger throughout the Twitter sphere, and it drives the media crazy because they got to report every tweet. Can you talk about that for a minute?
Sure. I mean, look, the president is the president of the United States, so everything he says is policy. Because when Kayleigh McEnany is out there, talking, people, I think quite rightly say, well, why do we bother covering her? Because, she's just a presidential spokesman. What she says is merely whatever the spokesman is saying. But when the president talks, it's policy. When the president talks, he's speaking for the nation. When the president talks, it has, global, domestic and global ramifications. And so I think it's really important, especially in this White House, where it's very clear that no one speaks for this president but himself, that there be a record of the things he says, and he chooses to do this on social media. I know all the arguments that have been rehearsed about why this is a bad idea. It degrades our civic life, and it does. Oh, this is, by the way, where I should add that I don't represent anybody. I work for the Navy, Harvard, any of those places, my cat. But it does degrade our civic life, but that's the price of having Donald Trump as president. His opponents will argue that it makes him more popular. Well, that's a risk you're going to run, but also it's not true. I actually, as a never Trump guy, I love having him out there. I think, he should give 2-hour press conferences every day, and he should be on Twitter 24/7. But I think as a civic matter, it's really important to have him out there because, again, no one speaks for him. He can only speak for himself because he pulls the rug out from underneath anybody who tries to represent his views. I think, as I said in the piece, it also builds a kind of firewall against the ability of his subordinates to lie, because no matter what they say, they get out. I've said for 3 years, one of Trump's greatest talents is to get all his defenders to crowd onto the end of a limb, and then he saws it off behind them like a Warner Brothers cartoon.
Mm-hmm.
So you get the spokesman out there saying, "Now, what the president really means," and in the back you can sort of hear. And so it kind of firewalls off a lot of the ability of his minions to lie, because he always says the quiet part out loud. And finally, I think, every president has to leave a documentary record of a presidency. Now, other presidents do that by actually, writing stuff. As a former Republican, long of blessed memory. You know, it always bothered me that people said, oh, Reagan's just dumb and he just watches TV and goes to bed. This guy filled diaries, hundreds and hundreds of pages every night. He left an entire documentary record of 8 years of a presidency. Trump does nothing. He doesn't. George H.W. Bush used to dictate into a recorder. You know, Clinton had a biographer who followed him around. I mean, Trump has none of this. And so the only real record, I mean, the Trump Presidential Library is going to be a copy of The Art of the Deal and a lot of wallpaper with tweets all over it.
Yeah.
But
our friend Matt Negrin has already made that for us.
That's right. Our friend Matt Negrin works for The Daily Show, and he toured around with a Twitter library of Trump's tweets. They put out a book.
That's it. That's the Trump legacy. So I think it's really important to have this. Now, with that said, the one argument that I tried to make 3 years ago about why Trump shouldn't be on Twitter is that I think it's a national security threat. You know, I began my career as an analyst of Soviet politics and later Russian politics. Man, I would have given anything to have a constant interior view of Yuri Andropov's head. You know, I mean, just this is like, I'm sure that the president has blathered off about stuff that's classified, that is confidential, that shouldn't be out in the public. But you know, that ship has sailed. You're not going to stop him. So the notion that we should kick Trump off of Twitter, that Twitter should somehow ban him, I think it's also, I think Twitter would be living down to every stereotype about being just a kind of a liberal backwater if they did that. So for all those reasons, I think it's really important to just leave Trump where he is and let him do what he's doing.
I mean, like on Twitter, you mean like not where he is right now, like maybe next year?
Oh God,
okay.
no, God forbid. Let us just be clear that what I meant was that
you're here to hear, folks. Our
on,
top scoop. Tom Nichols endorses.
Never Trumper endorses Trump. No, to leave him, you know, on Twitter and on television. I think the less we see of professional liars like Kayleigh McEnany, and the more we see of the man himself, I think that's better. We're all better off for it, because I also think the American people, the people who object to Trump, deserve to have him out there answering for himself. And the people who support Trump should not be able to turn around and say, well, I don't know what he's really thinking, because that's a very common tactic among the Trump faithful.
Senate Republicans.
And Senate Republicans.
I didn't see it. I don't know anything about it. I don't really.
Yeah, I didn't see it. I don't know. You know, I was washing my hair. I was in the bathroom for 4 weeks. You know, that all of them do it, his voters and his enablers in elected branches of government. And so I think that the more times he's out there where you know, you have him on record in ways that are undeniable, I think that's all to the good.
You know what's really interesting about you and I'd say people like you, like Jennifer Rubin, Charlie Sykes, like you're an advisor to the Lincoln Project,
right?
And that is a group of former Republicans or current Republicans who are never
apostates, and heretics and pirates.
And I gotta say, they have received more of my money this year than any Democratic candidate, sans John Hickenlooper, who I'm friends with. So this is an amazing project. So my curiosity for you, Tom, and for Republicans like you, let's say Biden wins, okay?
Right.
November he wins. We assume he takes office in January 20th. What happens? Then you've got three factions, because the Trump wing doesn't go away. I don't believe it melts away, right? Then you have traditional. I want to call you traditional. How about conservative classic?
Small C conservatives.
Small C conservatives, and then you have Democrats who you've teamed up with to beat Trump. So you have these small C conservatives teaming up with progressives, and like we could all draw a Venn diagram in our minds where you guys are united, but there are more areas where you're not united.
Yeah, you know, one of the things that the Trumper conservatives love to say to people like me and the other Lincoln Project types is, you know, when this election's over, they're gonna ignore you. They're gonna throw you out. And you know, and I've said this, and I know Conway and Wilson and the rest of them said. And by the way, I'm just an advisor. The hardcore there, the Wilson, Conway, Weaver, you know, those guys. They're the founder. That's the skunk works. You know, like they ask us for our input now and then, but I'm not there when the magic happens because those guys are professionals. You know, I'm
Best
just
political ads ever.
right, and I'm just an amateur. You know, giving feedback. Those guys are the real evil geniuses in the basement, you know, creating those ads. And I think those ads are effective because nobody knows how to hit Republicans like former Republicans. But, you know, a lot of times they'll say, our friends on the right will say to the Lincoln Project tips, you know, the liberals will they're going to ignore you. And we've all said it. Okay, fine, let them, you know. When this is over, you know, and we're not roommates anymore, and you guys don't, you know, we don't like us, whatever. We all agree on one thing, that Donald Trump is an existential menace to the Constitution of the United States. After that, fine. We can go back to arguing about marginal tax rates. You know, I mean, I know, and I know Jen Rubin has said this as well, we cannot, at least a few of us, we are never going to go back to being, and I know Rick has said this as well, we will never go back to being as partisan as we once were. And I hope that Democrats don't take that lesson, you know, that super partisanship is the way to go. I mean, I will vote against, even after Trump's gone, I'm going to vote against any Republicans that were ever tainted by Trump forever. But I think, you know, one of the things I hope we've all learned by this is that partisan differences about policy are not as important as the things we share, and particularly a shared faith in our constitutional culture. Because that's the thing that Trump really endangered. I mean, if I really wanted to be the opportunist that a lot of our opponents on the right paint us as, I would have just gone along for the ride. You know, tax cuts, conservative judges, you know, kind of, I mean, I think the Trump foreign policy is insane.
There's a policy?
Well, insofar as there's a policy, but you know, there were initially people, I knew some of the people that went into that administration, and they weren't crazy. I could have just sat back and said, you know, I don't need anybody throwing all these rocks at me and trying to get fired, which happens about every couple of months. But I think this is where we and our friends further to the left, we were able to carve out a space that says we are never going to agree about some things like, you know, like, I don't know, tax policy or whatever, you know, the reach of government, whether, you know, how big government should be. But those are arguments that are within the range of a normal set of right-left arguments within a constitutional system. What the Trump people have done is attack the constitutional system itself. And basically said, liberal democracy is for chumps. And that's the part where I think we were all able to find common ground. So a couple of things about what happens, you know, God willing, knock on wood, that, you know, Joe Biden is elected. First, I don't have it in me to go, you know, to the mattresses for political warfare after this. And I'm still going to be, I don't intend to ever let any of the Trump enablers forget what they did. So insofar as I'm still going to be writing stuff after Trump's gone, it will be every time, you know, Tom Cotton or Marco Rubio or somebody opens his mouth, you know, there will, I can tell you, and at least among some former Republicans, there are no bygones here. A lot of bridges have been burned. And I think, right, and again, not so much me, I'm nobody. I mean, I live in Rhode Island and teach. But I think among professional Republicans, there were a lot of bridges burned, and I think that was a good thing to see, because it really did say there are some lines you can't cross, and there's no going back. So I think a lot of us are still going to be basically saying, you know, Trumpism without Trump is just as bad. And the people that are going to try and make hay out of this down the line, I mean, you can already see guys like Cotton setting up their presidential run. You know, I can go from never Trump to never Cotton pretty easily at this point. But does that mean that every time Joe Biden says something that I'm going to, you know, sit back and clap and say, well, he's not Trump, so I'm okay with it? Of course not. I plan on being as big a pain in the ass as I always was about politics. Insofar as anybody cares what I think, and write my pieces and the occasional piece in the newspaper. But I think, once Trump is gone, yeah, the Never Trump movement in that sense turns into something else. We joke among ourselves in the Never Trump movement that once Trump is gone, then we set up the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think there's going to be a shakeout, and there's going to be, opportunists trying to seize what's left of the Republican Party, and I think they still need conservatives to call them out. Will we be disagreeing with Joe Biden about stuff? Sure, I hope so. I think that's what makes for a healthy country. But we won't be disagreeing on whether there ought to be a First Amendment.
Right.
Yeah, or the First Amendment is a real amendment instead of a selectively implemented, evoked, rhetorical piece of power.
We won't be arguing about whether it's a good idea to send the United States Army into the streets of America's cities just because the president happens to be pissed off that day.
Yeah, this gets into something that I really wanted to ask you about, and this goes back to, like we said, we talked with Trey Crowder about this as well, and you wrote this great piece that basically drug Trump through the mud, and it was I guess that's not just one piece, but in a particular way, the one from the Atlantic on May 26th, Donald Trump, the most unmanly president. And when I read this and then saw you work on the Lincoln Project, I was like, I think this is their huckleberry, because this seems to me to be kind of the most insane aspect of this. And like when Trey and I talked about it, because I'm from the country in North Carolina, Trey Crowder is from, the hills of Tennessee. And what we are both blown away by is that, and Trey, this is Trey's words, he really captured this. It was like talking about how when we were kids growing up in the South, our enemy, like the enemy we imagined, like the bad guy in movies, was basically Donald Trump. Some born rich, limousine riding, city slicking Yankee who talked and talked and talked and didn't shut up and wouldn't have said things when he didn't know what he was talking about. He's like the epitome. And flash forward 30 years, and now the people we grew up with, so many of them are sold on the idea that this guy is some kind of hero. And Trey Crowder said it best. He said, when we were kids, if you would have described Donald Trump, 95% of the people I grew up with would have just responded, he just needs his ass whooped. That's the way we would have seen it. And now the same people are latching on to this guy. What do you think happened?
Well, first of all, let's let the Lincoln Project off the hook for this one, because that article actually came about because of a conversation I had with the editor of the Atlantic. Because I've written a lot of pieces for the Atlantic, and I've talked with some of the writers and editors there, and we got talking, and he said, this really is a mystifying thing. And I said, yeah, it is. And he said, you should write about this. And I said, well, I'm like, I don't know how to write about something that's this obvious almost. It's like there was too much. It was almost like, I didn't know where to start because my brain locked up right away by saying, it's like talking about, about why grass is green. But the key to the piece, and the thing that I think was misunderstood, certainly it was misunderstood by the people that called and left tons of F-bombs and challenges to fight on my office phone, which I had to forward off to the Navy because it's a government phone and people are dumb.
Oh, God.
I was like, wow. But anyway, the people that were incensed by this thought that I was calling out Trump as not being in some way manly. And that's why I put in the piece, I am not a manly guy. I'm a cat guy. I use shower gels that I buy mail order from New York. I wear, Italian, like I said in the piece, I wear Italian shoes with little buckles, What I was saying was to Trump's base, by your definition, and Ben, this is the thing you were getting at, right? That the guys who support him, if you'd ask their definition of what manliness is about, it would all be the opposite of what Donald Trump is. It would, and so I was hammering on the point, not about manliness, but about hypocrisy. which is, how did you come to sell your soul to somebody that in any other context you would hate his guts? If again, and Ben, I think you captured it beautifully. If you had described this guy to the kind of guys you grew up with, you'd say, the first thing you'd say is, that's a guy that just, I would want to punch on principle. And yet they think of him as strong. They think of him as manly. They say he's tough. He doesn't take any guff. He speaks his mind. None of those things are true. I mean, he is an immense coward in every way. He whines. He's a little boy. And so the whining, and that was the key, because I think the other key to the piece that people didn't, at least the angry people didn't understand, is I wasn't saying that Donald Trump is effeminate. I'm saying that Donald Trump's a little boy. He's not a man, because men are adults. Men have grown up. Donald Trump has simply not grown up. And so I kind of wrote it as a challenge to the kind of guys I grew up with. You're talking about growing up in the South. I grew up in a factory town in Massachusetts among really genuinely tough guys. The World War II, Korea, Vietnam generations in my hometown. Guys that worked in a factory for a living, cops, my brother, my father, tough guys. So it was more of a challenge to those guys to say, how is it that you are so consumed by your own resentment and your own petty grievances that you are willing to basically accept this kind of behavior in a way that you would never accept from your best friend or your, God forbid, your son. Most of the men I know, that I grew up with, if their son acted like this, they would consider him a failure as a man. And that's really what I was trying to get at. Now, as it turns out, apparently Trump either read the piece or somebody read it to him, because the next day he attacked the Atlantic, which he has never done before. So, I think we have to assume that was the piece that did it. But, it really does raise a question, I think, for everybody, not just for men, for evangelicals, for people who believe that they are the, protectors of conservative values, for the small government conservatives, for the low tax conservatives. They have abandoned everything for Donald Trump. And I think it's because it all boils down to one simple thing, which is that Trump makes people mad that they also happen to hate.
White trash mentality.
And it's
we can cut that out if you want to. That's just what
No. I mean, I think that's almost too narrow a term, though, because there are a lot of guys I know who live in $500,000 houses here by the shore who have the same kind of belief that I worked really hard all my life, and I may not be the most educated guy in the world, but I have this sneaking suspicion that other people are looking down on me.
Yeah.
And so it's not just a white trash problem. It's this general kind of narcissistic, everybody is thinking about me problem that I think didn't used to be the case in America. We used to be a little more stoic. We used to be a little humbler to go through our average day and say, you know what, most people in the world aren't thinking about me.
Yeah. So let me clarify what I mean by that. The way I've described this before, it's like nothing I've ever written, but like the way I describe it is the type of person who goes to work and having a bad day, gets asked to do their job and decides that the manager has singled them out, yells at the manager, tells them a piece of their mind, then goes home with no job, and everyone cheers them on for telling the manager exactly what was on her mind, giving a piece of their mind, and then everyone cheers as if the person doesn't not have a job, right? Like self-sabotage in the interest of just saying what's on your mind.
And there's two forms of that. One is what you refer to as that kind of white trash mentality. That's in J.D. Vance and I am no fan of J.D. Vance, to be honest with you, because Vance has decided now that J.D. Vance is a separate subject, but Vance does nail something in his memoir, which is a reverse snobbery, which is that just in the same way that, educated elites in the cities look down on uneducated rural people, he points out that there are uneducated rural people who look down on people simply because they are educated and live in cities. Like bias goes in both directions. But that second problem you're talking about, I think, is really important as well. To me, this is right. We increasingly over the years, it seems like you always hear about somebody who says, "Hey, why is that guy in a play?" Well, he had a problem with his boss. He had a problem with the boss. There's always this sense of everything's about me, and I had a problem, and I was told to do something, and it pissed me off. And who do they think they are? And who does my foreman think he is to tell me to do stuff that foreman didn't do?
Yeah.
And it has become this kind of perpetually adolescent approach, where everybody sounds. I mean, where I first started noticing this kind of in my late 30s, early 40s, where I felt like there were guys my age who still sounded 14, and I think Trump, and this comes back to what I wrote about in the Atlantic piece, Trump is a permission slip not to grow up. You don't like, marriage is hard. You don't like being married? Hey, trade her in for a younger model. Trump's had 3. You don't want to pay your debts? Don't. Adults do that, but kids don't have to do it. Be like Trump, stiff everybody who works for you. You don't want to live up to your responsibilities, whine about it, blame the other guys. And I think that has become endemic to our society. I mean, I think it's just something, I think the real pandemic, I'm working on a book now, and there's a part in it where I say the real pandemic in America is narcissism. We're all the most important people in the world. And Trump, who is the most astonishingly narcissistic human being ever to take the political stage in America, is an expression of that. When people look at Donald Trump and they say, he's just like me, the saddest thing you can say about America is they're not wrong.
Well, first of all, with my 9-year-old son, we use him as the example of how to not behave.
Right. Right. I mean,
that's how the president, don't you do that, because that's what the president does. That's how he acts.
My daughter, when he was elected, my daughter just turned 17. So I'm, like a heartbroken father that my daughter has grown up. But when she was about 14, when Trump was elected, and she said, "Dad, is this okay now? Like, people can act this way, the president?" And I said, "No, it's not okay. This is not okay." And I think that for a lot of people who, out there who just said, I'm unhappy with my life. I don't like my job. I'm pissed off about the world, whatever it is. Trump was the permission slip to say it's okay to be a flaming jackass to everybody around you, because it's fun and it makes life more interesting. And you don't have to follow all these rules. Grown-ups have to follow rules, but they're not for you. And I think that is a real problem.
It's baffling, because this is the opposite of what you think of when you think of a conservative, like a traditional lowercase c conservative. I was going to ask you this with regards to The Death of Expertise, your book that came out in 2018, which we really want to talk about. But I was going to ask you but this comes in with the book that you're working on now. Is the issue at the core of The Death of Expertise the same thing at the core of what you're working on now?
Yes.
Is it a moral issue?
Yes. And, I didn't want to write about this in The Death of Expertise. Just a little bit of backstory here. When I wrote The Death of Expertise, I said, okay, I've identified this problem. People need to stop doing this, or we're going to have a pandemic. I was going around the country and I was literally saying things like, stop listening to anti-vaxxers. We're going to have a pandemic. But every time I gave a talk, inevitably the audience, and sometimes the organizers would even ask beforehand, they'd say, "Hey, can you really make this talk about democracy?" And I came to realize that, you couldn't separate those two things. Like that subject about democracy was lurking right underneath the book about expertise. And when The Death of Expertise became a big thing, of course, I had a lot of people ask me, "Oh, you're going to write another book?" And I just let it sit for a few years, because I didn't want to just try and, crank something out just because people were reading book. But I waited a few years, and it really did come back to me that the thing I had to write about was the thing that was lurking underneath the discussions about expertise. And that is the way that narcissism and entitlement are convincing us that we ought to destroy our own democracy. I am exhausted, and this predates Trump. I am exhausted by people using expressions like the system is broken, democracy doesn't work, America is a failed state. You know, having spent most of my life studying Russia, that really gets on my nerves after a while. I mean, we are not, you know, we have problems. America is not perfect. There are things we can fix. But part of the way people get convinced to start using that kind of language is, first, they are tremendously narcissistic. You know, when someone loses their job, which has happened to me, boys and girls, you know, I have lost a job. It has thrown me into a tailspin. I've known what that's like. But it sounds better, instead of saying, look, life sucks, I lost my job, or I got fired, or whatever it was, instead it's say, I lost my job because the system is broken. I didn't just get mugged. I got mugged because society is in free fall. You know, it takes it and it turns it into a crusade. And the other part of that is you can lead yourself to believe all this stuff because of this death of expertise problem. I can't tell you how many arguments I had over the years being out on the road where I literally had to stop people and say, that's just wrong. You know, like violent crime, it's just out of control. No, it's not. No, America is not suffering a violent crime epidemic. Schools are more dangerous than they've ever been. No, they're not. Unemployment is right. No, it isn't. But if once you can let go of facts, then that narcissistic need for, George Will just used a great expression for this recently. He said, a hunger for apocalypse that makes life less boring, right? That when things are going really well, people need a cause, they need grandiosity, they need apocalypse. And so put that narcissism and that ignorance together, and this is the politics you get, where everything is the final election, everything is the election of our lifetime, everything is a Flight 93 election. And when it finally comes to the moment, like we're at now, where we really are facing an existential election, we're almost numb to it because we've been saying it to ourselves for 40 years.
Yeah, hyperbole. It's just everywhere. I just think about the work, you know, I studied Soviet history, and like at the time of the revolution, I mean, right before, there are a lot of narratives going around, but they all are, you know, this is a break, this is a rupture, even within the, you know, the Russian Orthodox Church, the idea that like the end of time is coming soon. And that those ideas and those sentiments laying around when a real crisis happens can be dangerous.
Well, you know, it's kind of like when people, you know, go to their ancestry, right, or do their genealogy, or now they do it through, you know, ancestry.com or 23andMe. Nobody ever says, oh yeah, I finally did my genealogy, and I'm related to the guy who shoveled out staples in, you know, a small town in Bulgaria, right? It's always they say, hey, it turns out I'm related to Robert the Bruce, you know. Well, yeah, kind of, we all are. You know, at some level, but we want to feel like we're part of a big drama, we're part of a big narrative, and it's really turned us into a nation of howling just drama queens. And you know, Bob, your point about you know, conservatives, I mean, part of the reason I was drawn to conservatism as a young man is because they were boring, is because they were the kind of methodical, yeah, you know, yes, people, every time I say this, people say, oh, but they were racists and they were, you know, capitalist exploit. Yeah, I mean, you know, there are bad people in every movement. I mean, just like, you know, when I was in college, there were people on the left who were, no kidding, Stalinists and Trotskyites. I mean, I had Howard Zinn as a college professor at BU, you know. I kind of liked him, actually.
I liked him a lot, actually.
But Howard, you know, Howard's narrative was, you know, that, well, anyway, you know, just like
certainly
Vance, Howard Zinn is a subject for another day. But you know, there were a lot of people in all of these movements that you didn't, you know, that were suspect, whose politics were suspect. But I was gravitated to the one that at least tried in the pre-90s era, the pre-Gingrich era, that was sort of based on boring argumentation. I mean, I really liked the fact that National Review when I first, you know, started reading it in the early 80s, was boring. And I read it from cover to cover. it wasn't interesting. It was wonky.
Yeah.
Like,
And I thought,
shouldn't government be boring?
yes,
Like,
yes, government.
like, we're doing something right if nothing ever happens. Like, we're doing it right.
I have worked in a mayor's office. I volunteered to help my hometown mayor for a summer. I spent 2.5 years in the Massachusetts State House as an aide, and I worked in the U.S. Senate. 99% of politics is boring, and it ought to be. And I think that the American public just doesn't have the stomach for that. It's kind of like the public now feels about politics. It's kind of like the way they feel about police work because they've been watching Law and Order too much. Like police work is boring. It's dull. It's more like I just binged during the pandemic. I finally binged The Wire. Like The Wire is not an exciting show. It's engrossing, but it's not exciting. And that's the same about politics. I mean, you can't really make a real show about politics because politics is dull, and people don't want that. They want politics to be interesting, and they want it to be about them all day. And that's why I think increasingly we have celebrity politicians of both parties and I think it's tremendously unhealthy.
So last week, the run up to Tulsa was death of expertise in real time,
God,
right?
yeah.
You have Trump saying, we're going to pack this thing out, 1 million people, 19,000 inside, whatever outside. Mask optional. And then you have Fauci saying, I wouldn't go. You probably shouldn't go. You really need it. The science says wear a mask. It's really sad people don't listen to science anymore. Science is truth, right? That's what Fauci kind of ends that sentence saying. Science is true. It's truth.
And I'll give a shout out to Fauci because he was one of the few doctors who also said this about the Black Lives Matters protest. Where they asked him what he thought about this, and he said, "I'm worried. I'm very worried about this. This is, again, the science doesn't care what your cause is." And I think this was a bad month for expertise because everybody dismissed science at will when it conflicted with things they wanted to do.
But couldn't one make the argument that on the one hand, if you feel life and a principle is at stake, as you do when you go out into the street for a Black Lives Matter protest, like that's a very much different thing than going to like a concert, which is basically what a Trump rally is. It's like going to a concert.
No, and I will dig in my heels on this and say the virus doesn't care why you're there. The virus just cares that a bunch of you are cramped together in a place breathing on each other. And I think it was wrong of the experts to say, well, but this is really important. Well, okay, if you're saying that this is important enough to risk spreading the virus, then just say so. But I think you had a lot of people, and I could have predicted the Trump rally following this as night follows day. That once, first of all, once you had enough people saying, well, clearly lockdowns are selective, right? If you want to go into the street, go into the street. That was, I think that that's one of the reasons we're never going to get back to that. And if there's another wave of this pandemic, nobody's going to listen to anybody. I take your point, Ben, that, you say, okay, if you're protesting because you're just a jerk who wants to wave a Confederate flag because you're wearing a mask, if somebody told you to wear a mask, that's different than protesting an essential issue of social justice. But from an expert point of view, from the doctor's point of view, the doctor's answer should be, if this is more than X people gathered together, it is indistinguishable to the virus.
Yeah, I get your point. You're totally right. I got you.
And I think the problem is that everybody kind of backed off of that. Now, I think that in the president's case, because there are so many people who will do exactly what the president tells them to do, that it was especially irresponsible because he knows the power he has as the chief executive. He knows that millions of people take his word as gospel. And he kind of turns this, it's like the clown nose on, clown nose off criticism of journalists, right? That I'm being an entertainer, I'm being a jerk. Well, the president did the same thing about the pandemic. It's a terrible thing. but it's fake news and it came from China. But of course, of course, we should all do our best to listen to the doctors, unless you want to come to a rally. And so, I think by the end of all of this, after a month, expertise isn't just dead. It's been beaten, unrecognizable with a shovel and left in a shallow grave like a mob snitch at this point. I mean, it's just, it's just tragic. And I think it's going to be hard to bring that back for anybody at this point.
I want to add one thing here, just while we're on this. Like, where do you see this originating, right? Because I think what's interesting, like specifically, like with the article about Trump, the most unmanly president, you hit on some of kind of the same themes with with the death of expertise, namely like that people kind of feel like they want to do what they want to do. And I get that for people who are like 40 right now, because they're at the tail end of like, I think that things changed at some point, like post-World War II moment created something that was unlike anything before. So for the people that are like my age, they were told it was like it was for like 2 generations and promised that. And then it kind of fell off when they got to middle age and it's hard for them to catch back up. For the younger generation, they're already figuring out that it's, that it's kind of garbage. They're cynical. I like that. But it's the boomers that get me, because I understand for them, the new ideology might be threatening them, but they got their bags full, right? I mean, they lived the economy of the post-World War II boom, and most of them are retired, sitting on tons of equity right now. And I think there's like a gap between those two. How do you explain their willingness to kind of disregard expertise when they believed it? They landed men on the moon. They did all those things and saw science working.
Well, first things first, let me get a burr out of my saddle here, because I always get tagged as being a boomer because I was born in 1960. I like to say that I'm part of Generation Jones, this very cynical generation that came after the boomers but before the Xers. And that actually informs a lot of my view on this, because I kind of hate them all. Actually, I like the Xers a lot. But I started, I hate the boomers as much as anybody. So rather than defend them, I'm just going to pile on with you. But just to make the case about this generational issue, remember that when I started high school in 1975, there was no draft. There were no troops in Vietnam. Gerald Ford was president. Nixon had been out of office for almost 2 years, year and a half. For me to argue that I and Bill Clinton, or I and John Bolton somehow had the same life experience generationally is insane. Yeah. Those guys that was a whole other world. So I think the people kind of born between 58 and 64, we became, the year I graduated was, Jimmy Carter, and Watergate had been over for 5 years, and the energy crisis. And so we were the most skeptical generation of all. So now let me go back to piling on boomers, which is, it's not that they respected expertise. It's that they became the dominant political force through sheer numbers, and because this capitalist economy, you can usually going to hear a conservative like me talk raging about capitalism, but I'm going to. This capitalist economy marketized a permanent youth culture that totally pandered to the boomers as they aged. And as a result, you really did have a boomer generation that, that came into old age thinking everything's about me. If I think the world's okay, the world's okay. No one understands the great struggles that we won in the 60s, because all boomers, no matter what they were doing, all talk about the 60s as if every one of them was at Selma. Like all of them were trying to levitate the Pentagon, when in fact most of them were just going to college and getting high. I actually had this argument with a boomer colleague years ago when I was at Dartmouth. He was going on about frat boys at Dartmouth drinking too much beer, and I turned to him and I said, "Dude, you dropped acid in college. They're just drinking beer." And he said, "Yeah, but we did it for peace, man." And I was like, "Yeah, whatever."
Just a few more hits and we're going to end the war.
Yeah, so I was like, but actually, and let me just, I won't name the guy. He's a friend of mine, and he actually really was an activist. I mean, he went and worked, he said, "I'm going to leave college and I'm going to go work manual labor jobs and be a labor activist and all that stuff." So he walked the walk. But I think, a lot of the boomers now are like, of course we grew up in a time when America was supreme, science reigned, and now what they're trying to do is to jam all of that into a narrative about cultural change that they can't explain. And that makes them uncomfortable. And it's because they have a selective memory. I grew up in the 60s as a little boy. So while these guys were teenagers and young adults, I was a kid. I have no nostalgia about that period, in part because I was young enough to know that mostly it was an economically and certainly technologically backward time compared to the time I live in now. But also because I'm far enough away from it to realize that it was, you can only be nostalgic about it if you were not a person of color, if you were not a woman, if you were not poor, And so when I hear boomers waxing nostalgic about the old days, like, when economists talk about, hey, wasn't it great that one earner could maintain a family? Yeah, well, because women were told to stay in the house and shut up. That's how you did it. The market responded to that. You have one earner because that's all that the economy was going to allow. But I also lose my patience here with younger folks because they lack any context about this. And so just as the boomers keep talking about, when it was really great was, 1970, when blacks and women knew their place and Archie Bunker was king of the world. But I also lose my patience with younger people who say, these are the worst times ever.
Yeah.
That just spins me right up, because I have said many times in class, I teach undergraduates in the other half of my career here. And when they say, it's just the worst times ever, and nobody's ever had it this bad, I'm like, look, these are not even the worst times in my living memory. Okay. And then I start doing the grandpa stuff, right? I turn into Grandpa Simpson. All right, and I'm wearing an onion on my belt, and I gotta tell you, crazy kids, about when the Kaiser raised interest rates to 8%, but I end up doing it because it matters. And the reason all this matters is you can't make policy based on being wrong about things. Like the way I often put it is saying, make these policies based on the idea that 1970 was better, or that these are the worst times ever. It's like being a hypochondriac and going to your doctor and saying, look, I think I have cancer. And the doctor says, you're a hypochondriac, you don't have cancer. No, I want you to give me chemo anyway. Just do it.
Lots of it.
And lots of it. And so I think, there needs to be more. And this is a quality that I used to associate with conservatives. There needs to be more stoicism in American life. Now, let me just quickly add, because I can hear people out in the world rolling their eyes at me. Conservatives are the least stoic people now of all. Conservatives are the biggest whining, screaming snowflakes in American life. And it's especially remarkable because they are still the politically dominant force. They still control the Senate, the presidency. Up until 2 years ago, they controlled the House. They control a majority of the governorships. And they still talk as if there's some kind of like beleaguered underground movement that, is like, they act like they're a bunch of secret Christians hiding in the catacombs, trying to stay away from the Roman guard, which is crap.
That goes back to your point, which is like the whole narrative is like everyone's after me as an individual, which like spins into, like we've talked with Stacey, what about these conspiracy theories? I mean, like the way you've kind of bridged these concepts is like, if you think everything's about you and everything isn't okay, well, everyone's after me. So who is it? And I'll believe anybody except for someone who tells me it's my own fault.
And this is one of the things, let me just put in a kind word for boomers and Joe Biden. I mean, in some sense, Biden is, certainly compared to Trump, far more stoic, sort of, shrugs, kind of laughs things off a little bit, says things with a serious, Biden's a gaffe machine because he has no inner monologue. But I kind of like that about him, truthfully at this point. But there is something about an older generation like that says, well, bad things happen and you do what you can and try to make things better. But without this constant screaming, it's about me, it's victimhood, it's the worst thing that's ever happened to anybody. I mean, Trump has patented this, right? I've been treated worse. The media treats me worse than Abraham Lincoln.
That's right. Yeah.
You know,
CNN,
I
man,
mean,
CNN was said nothing about Lincoln, nothing at all. Just
Yeah.
let him do what he was doing.
yeah, I mean, oh, absolutely. Right. I mean, back in the day, boy, Fox News was totally loved Lincoln. It's just an inane comment on its face, but it shows you that we've become inured to it, that we've become deadened to it, because a lot of Americans talk this way. The war on Christmas, and people yelling at each other about wearing masks. If you're wearing a mask, you're just calling me out. I mean, it has. And let me just now infuriate everybody by both sidesing this a bit. This is the same kind of "I am the center of the universe" that leads kids to pull down statues of Ulysses Grant. It's like, oh, I wanted to get on this statue pulling thing, and all the good ones are taken.
Oh man, I hadn't thought about it like that.
Why hasn't anybody pulled down this statue?
What about this one? This guy, and apparently for about 10 minutes, somebody gave his father-in-law or something, gave Grant a slave that he then emancipated.
He freed him. Grant was at the lowest point of his life. He had nothing.
But
and he walked that man over. Courthouse gone.
Listen, Grant's father, I'm reading Grant's memoirs. My wife bought me like first edition copies for our anniversary like 10 years ago. And they're amazing. But Grant's father was a tanner, and he apprenticed with John Brown's father. So he was an abolitionist.
You read Grant's memoirs, and of course he knew he was dying. And there's this heaviness and seriousness and yet humility that comes through them, but again, I am a strong advocate. I mean, I'm from New England. I grew up in Massachusetts. You want to pull down Confederate statues? I am there for you. I walk to work every day at Beacon Hill past the Robert Gould Shaw Memorial, the commander of the Massachusetts 54th. I'd like to know why there isn't a Fort Shaw somewhere instead of a Fort Bragg. But when it turns into a big giant exercise in self-actualization, this is part of the same political problem, that it becomes about you. It becomes about what's making you feel involved and empowered and energized. And I think, that at some point, we have to start dealing with each other. I hope it's after 2020. We have to start dealing with each other like stoic adults. And some of that, and people aren't going to want to hear this, some of that is knowing when to accept a compromise, knowing when to accept a loss, knowing when to be gracious in victory. All things that were once part of our politics that now have been lost in this kind of winner take all. And I'll just take a quick right turn, an orthogonal turn here. You guys know I was on Jeopardy, and I was a five-time champ.
94.
Yes.
And this is why. And this is why I didn't like James, the Vegas gambler who ran the board.
Nobody liked
it.
Because the show, instead of being a good-natured competition of ordinary people showing their smarts, America started cheering for a professional to go in and break the board and take all the money. And I think that, to me, that whole way that Jeopardy changed, when Alex retires, God bless him, they ought to just shut the show down, because the show is now that really has broken the spirit of the show. And that, to me, is a microcosm of America. Instead of this game show being where people say, wow, look at that transit cop. He's really smart. It's, hey, I hope that guy from Vegas cleans out Sony TV.
Were people rooting for him? Were people rooting for him?
Oh,
I hate watched him. I was like, take him out. And when Ken Jennings won that
was awesome.
Pretty much wiped the floor with him.
That was great.
People's champion.
Charles Lane at the Washington Post was one of the few people that wrote an article saying, I don't like this guy. And I put it out on Twitter, and I said, as a former player of the game, I don't like this either. And we got bombarded with, just like angry mail, like, you're just one guy said to me, I love it when people do this, because, this goes back to death of expertise and how dumb are people. One guy said, you hate James because you could never get on that show, and you would never win if you got on there. And I was like, You know,
Why do you usually say that?
I'm pretty sure I could probably do okay if I could ever get on the show. You know, I don't want to jump to any conclusions here, but I think I could probably do all right. But, you know, there is this resentful kind of, you know, just wanting to screw the other guy in everything we do, whether it's politics or competition or, you know, sports. I think we've just lost something fundamental to who we are in all this. And Trump is the apotheosis and final expression of it. But, you know, he didn't create this. He surfed it to the White House,
Yeah.
but he didn't make this.
Is part of the problem with expertise right now the platform that we communicate on? For example, Ben and I got into it with some people last week because they were saying, you know, the Civil War was not about slavery, and Ben chimed in, and then I'm like, well, you need to read Matthew Karp's This Vast Southern Empire to understand this. And the reality is, you can't make a really good argument or learn something by reading a Twitter thread. You need to read books.
Yeah, good luck with that.
They take weeks.
Yeah, from your lips to God's ear, thank you. But, you know.
They make you feel bad because they tell you things you don't want to hear. You can't yell at them. They don't care.
There's a couple of things going on. One is, I think one of the reasons people are so mad these days is that it's that they know. I always say this, you know, there was a, when Barry Goldwater ran, his supporters had a bumper sticker that said, "In your hearts, you know he's right." It was an attempt to get, you know, like you're being told to hate Goldwater, but you know deep down, you know. My take on that in the 21st century is, in your hearts, you know you're wrong. That most of the people advocating these things, there aren't that many people. I mean, I guess in the South, the lost cause myth is alive and well, but you know, the idea that, oh, slavery wasn't really important here. I mean, that's the kind of thing that you have to practice saying in the mirror so you don't burst out laughing. You know, and I think, well, like one of the reasons Trumpers are such angry people is they know. You notice that they've gotten angrier over the years, that winning did nothing for them. They're angry because they know how awful he is. And so telling people to read a book, you know, I would love that, but people have lost their tolerance for reading. And by the way, I'll raise my hand here and say I'm one of those people. I actually read fewer books in any given year now that I have a computer and Twitter and a phone and cool video games and, you know, all that other stuff. But I've noticed that I've been teaching now. I've been teaching undergraduates for probably 32 years now, and their tolerance for a reading list has shrunk. Like talk to any of my colleagues, we have to assign less reading than we did 15 or 20 or 25 years ago because the students just don't have the capacity for it. They don't have the attention span for it.
Well,
but I think
how do you balance that then? How do you get the make sure they get what you want them to get in a given semester without all the reading?
I terrorize them by testing them and telling them that I'll destroy their miserable young life. No.
Scorched earth.
Yeah. I just walk in and say, "Pray I do not alter the deal any further." I am, you know, I just try to find the best readings I can. Now, I'm fortunate. I don't teach in a, you know, political science graduate department where I have to assign them the classics, you know, that are just going to be really boring for them. And I don't teach methodology and all that stuff. So I get a little more, I teach a course at night on, you know, nuclear weapons and national security. And during the day, I get to teach military guys about national security affairs. So, you know, I can avoid some of that stuff. But if the question is, how do I get them to where I would want them to have been 20 years ago? The answer is I don't. And I think the other, Bob, to go back to your point about, you know, if you read a book, you would understand this better. If you were the kind of person to have your mind changed by reading a book, you wouldn't be in this situation in the first place. If you see what I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, can I add that I think like the spirit of read a book is kind of more invest yourself in learning about it, right? And I don't like, I assign my students, I mean, I teach all intro, like required classes, and I'm very careful to assign limited readings, because I've got a lot of students who are like, I don't like history, and I'm like, I don't think you actually know what it is. But like,
Right.
I've never found that if somebody was like, I don't like broccoli, I was like, what if you ate 6 pounds of it? That wouldn't change their minds. It's never worked before, right? So it's like you give them a mixture of documentaries, podcasts, like you kind of like engage their media, but it's more a matter of like, engage yourself in it, right? Don't read a tweet about it. Find someone who knows what they're talking about and jump sources if you need to. Go from one to one to one. And I don't know, maybe it works for me. I seem to think it does.
Yeah, I think, there's some of this is, it's like pilling the cat, right? So you can never get the cat to take the pill, but you can wrap it in things cats will eat. And that's always a part of teaching, right?
That is difficult, by the way.
Put a little bit of sugar to make the medicine go down. You notice I didn't say pill it. Dogs will eat anything. Pilling a cat, I'm a cat guy. Pilling a cat is a real test of the human spirit.
Right.
But I think that's always a problem with students when you say, look, this is something that's important, you need to know about. And I think that's incumbent on us as teachers. I have never just walked into a classroom and said, I don't care if you don't like it, and I know it's boring, and I hate it myself, and you're going to have to eat this broccoli. I try to make it clear to a student, there's a reason, but before I become a little bit more of an old school teacher, I don't want to have extended colloquies with the students going back to the very first premise about why I assigned this. I want there to be a certain amount of trust, that I've been through this before. In the Death of Expertise, I talk about this essay that my philosophy professor assigned to me, my political philosophy professor assigned to all of us on the first day, called What a Student Owes to a Teacher. The title itself would make kids' heads explode today, that they owe a teacher anything. But, he said, look, you owe me a certain amount of trust. You owe me a certain amount of industry and discipline, and so I think that has to be, I think we have to reestablish some sense of that trust, because we are all walking around, not just in classrooms, we are all walking around with a chip on our shoulder saying, convince me, show me. And by the way, I'm not going to let you finish, because whatever you're about to say, I'm going to start arguing with it already, because it makes me feel important to argue with you. And somehow we got addicted to that pure, uncut crack of being mad all the time as a form of self-actualization. Like, unless we're angry, we're not alive. And I don't know how to reverse course out of that. I thought, and now, let me just be one of the things I'm best known for on social media, a giant buzzkill. I really thought the pandemic would snap us out of a lot of this, and it hasn't. At least it hasn't among a fair number of people. Now, I'm actually pretty happy about the fact I live here, in Rhode Island. I was out today, had to go to the market. Everybody's wearing masks. They're holding doors for each other. There's really this kind of community side. I live in a small town, people are helping each other out. But I really thought that somehow this, something as simple as a medical crisis would not devolve into some kind of paranoid partisan name calling. And it has. So
isn't Trump responsible for that?
Absolutely. And, I was going to say that I didn't expect that there would be an entire political party devoted to politicizing a crisis.
This would not have happened with George W. Bush.
I don't think so.
Or Barack Obama.
Or
Warren G. Harding.
Well, let's not get too far out on a limb.
It's our obligatory one Warren G. Harding reference an episode.
Right. We do try to do that.
But Harding's one of the reasons I don't want there to be a President's Day anymore. So, it needs to be Washington and Lincoln's birthday, because when you President's Day, not only are you honoring Trump, which is a problem all itself, but you're honoring Warren G. Harding, and I think we all understand why that's a problem.
Yeah. Well.
So, I thought that the kind of moral equivalent of war would bring us more together. And I think in some places it has, but I almost think, again, it wasn't a disaster well, I don't know how to say this without sounding terrible. It's almost like it wasn't a disaster big enough because it happened in slow motion. 9/11 was something that happened all at once, right? And the whole country was kind of galvanized into a sudden realization of, oh my God, there are people in the world that really would kill every one of us if they got the chance.
Yeah.
Whereas this pandemic has been this kind of slow rolling, misery that's kind of ebbing and flowing through our cities and towns. And it's giving people, again, the chance to say, well, what really matters is me and what I think, and my neighbor can go to hell. And I
9/11
think that's really pathetic.
9/11 was a crisis where you were like, oh my God, there's people in this world that don't care if we live and we die. Plot twist, it's your uncle. It's your uncle at Thanksgiving. He's the one who doesn't care if we all live or die.
Right,
That's a real hard lesson.
Well, the other interesting thing about 9/11 was, hey, there are people in the world that want to kill us all, and they're not really interested in which party we support.
Yeah.
Like they want to kill us because we're us. And like, I think right after 9/11, I think it was Michael Moore who said something fantastically stupid. Like, why are they attacking New York? Those people don't like Bush, And it's like, that's not what this is about, They don't think that way. And so I thought there might be a little more unity coming out of this. I'm actually hopeful because Joe Biden, whatever else you can say about him, he's not that interesting and he's not that polarizing character. I hope that we go back. I really look forward to Biden taking office and we all go back to being bored as hell with politics.
Yeah. And isn't that what Trump threatens? He says, well, if I'm not here, the show's over. I'm the show. You need this. You need me for the show.
Yeah, but it's interesting. He last night in Tulsa, which really by his standards was a total crazy pants meltdown. Every time he does a rally, I say, boy, that was really the weird, that was the worst one. Now he last night when he reenacted that walk down the ramp 3 times, that was a topper.
I saw you tweeting that last night, and you were like, "I have a feeling I know where this is going. I have a feeling."
I knew where he was
like,
going.
I
He was talking about. I said, "I can't believe this is all a big wind-up for the ramp story." And when it was over, all I could say was the same thing George Bush had said after the inauguration. That was some weird shit.
Weird shit, yeah.
But I think he's not just that the show is over, but once I'm gone, the leftist Sharia drag queen abortionist hordes are going to take over the country. And he has convinced people that whose lives are no different today than they were 5 or 10 or 15 years ago. He has really convinced them that they are in mortal peril. And to believe that. So I think it's more than just the show being over. He has somehow convinced people that the least consequential, at least in terms of his ability to get anything done, that this complete stumble bum, administration is the only thing standing between these people and, the Muslim hordes arriving on our shores or something. And so that's worrisome. It's more than just the show. But I also think you're right. I think there are people who said, I just want to watch it all. I knew people who said, I know he's going to be a terrible president, but this is going to be awesome. It'll be cool to watch.
I'd like to point out that I've been drinking with one hand all night and I haven't heard a bit of applause. So I'm just wondering, is this really the country we want to be in?
So Tom, you've been so gracious with your time. Before you leave, we do have a couple questions from our wonderful patrons, our good friends here. Dale Martin writes, Trump is totally evil and probably incompetent given by any normal standards. His incompetency seems to be part of his appeal to his base. We've talked a lot about that tonight. But what about Mitch McConnell? He seems much more calculating and strategic and even more evil to me, e.g. Merrick Garland. And now McConnell says he would put forth a candidate in I guess the Supreme Court vacancy, say one came open tomorrow, he would put one forward before November.
He couldn't have said that because he said it 4 years ago. He said he wouldn't do that. That was wrong. No way that he would do that.
Biden rule.
One of the before I say anything specific about McConnell and Barr, I'll say one of the things that attracted me to conservatism as a young man back, when I was a young man during the Jurassic, but in the late 70s and early 80s, was that they were constantly decrying situational ethics and moral relativism. They are now the party of situational ethics and moral relativism. McConnell invents a rule saying you can't do this in the last term of a president, blah, blah, blah. Oh, if that's going to work out for us, okay, then you can totally do it. So I think like Trump, there is only so far you can go in holding Donald Trump responsible for anything, because I don't think he has a clue about most things that happen around him. I think he really is, you know, and the Bolton memoir makes this clear, right? He has no concept of anything going on. People try and brief him and he talks and he's in his own world. McConnell and Barr are the two most dangerous people in American politics right now, far more than Donald Trump, because they're competent and they're smart and they know what they're doing. They know exactly what they're doing.
William Barr keeps me up at night.
Oh yeah, Barr knows exactly what he's doing. You know, and I think that Barr, it is my, you know, my non-expert personal view of Barr's activity, that he is actively undermining the Constitution because he thinks that he's saving America from the barbarian hordes. You know, that I mean, there is a kind of authoritarian theocrat in a nice suit there, and a so-so suit.
I was going to say, really?
Not that nice a suit.
I stands next to the same suit every day, so maybe that does it.
That Barr to me is, you know, an authoritarian. When you saw him out there on Lafayette Square strutting around, you know, inspecting the troops, I mean, he was itching to have those guys fire tear gas into that crowd. I mean, Barr, I think, is one of the most dangerous human beings to ever get this far in American politics. And McConnell, the Jane Mayer piece on McConnell had a great quote in it from someone who knows him that basically said, look, I know you're trying to figure out what motivates McConnell, what makes him tick. And the answer is nothing. There is no there. It's about power, that what he wants to be, you know, when he was 5 years old, he wanted to be Senate Majority Leader. That was it. And I think, you know, again, that's a very dangerous person, because there are no guardrails. There are no red lines. It's whatever's good for me is good for me. And I think that plus this kind of theocratic, anti-constitutional attorney general is one of the most dangerous combinations we've ever seen. I have argued with people for a while now. I don't care what you think about Trump. I actually have argued for 2 years now, vote the Republican Party out from top to bottom, because the whole party itself has become a danger.
So do you think, speaking about the Berman issue, the head of the Southern District of New York, who was unceremoniously fired this weekend by Trump. Trump says he doesn't know anything about it, but apparently he did it.
People can't see it, but I'm doing my Dr. Evil thing. Fired.
Yes.
You know.
So apparently, because Berman did not step down on Friday night when Barr put out a statement saying that he had agreed to step down, somehow Berman negotiated that his number 2 would take over for him at the SDNY. So is that, should we feel a little better about that?
Yes, I think we should. And, you know, as Berman said in his second statement, now that William Barr has agreed to observe the normal procedures of law, because the whole point there, and man, I don't know what the SDNY, what body they dug up, but it must be ripe. It must have been buried for a while, and it must be in some pretty nasty stuff, because you know, that this was a Hail Mary pass at the last minute to take out the head of the SDNY and put in a guy who had no prosecutorial experience whatsoever. Now, call me crazy and suspicious, but when you try to get rid of an experienced prosecutor and put in a guy that's never been a prosecutor, I think you're up to something. So, you know, this guy, by digging in his heels and saying that only the president can fire me, Barr then says, the president has fired you. Trump says, I don't know what's going on. I'm not involved. I don't know. Well, that blew up the whole thing. And the only thing they could do was say, well, we can't just replace you at will with a new guy. You need to step down. The president needs to nominate somebody. The Senate needs to confirm them. And until then, according to normal procedure, your deputy will take over for you. You could see Berman going, okay, I'm fine with that. Bye-bye, I'm out. because the deputy apparently is going to keep doing whatever they've been doing. But it tells you something first about whatever gigantic, you know, nasty thing they've uncovered, but it also tells you something about how far somebody like Barr will go simply to say, Constitution, separated powers, rule of law, you know, who cares about any of that stuff? And the only reason he didn't get away with it is there was one guy in an office in New York said, I'm not going along with this.
And it's not over yet.
And
It's not over yet. And Berman, I guess, was a donor to Trump's campaign. I guess he was put there by Trump, right? He was put there by Judge.
No, he was put there by a panel of judges.
I don't know. Okay. So
because Trump wouldn't nominate somebody to the job. Trump, you know, just as a quick, going back to your point about will this incompetence save us? You know, Steve Bannon talked a lot about, I'm a Leninist and I'm going to come in and I'm going to destroy everything. Hey, real Leninists understand that personnel policy controls everything. And this administration decided never to fill these jobs. They fire people at will, develop no loyalty. I mean, in that sense, we should be grateful. These guys were terrible at this. They wanted to be Leninists and they sucked at it.
That's the title of a book in the future. Bad Leninists.
I was a bad Leninist. Right? The Leninists who sucked. A history of the Trump administration.
And the fear is that someday somebody gets in who's good at it.
Right. We can't even speculate about who that might be, Tom Cotton. But anyway, you know.
Exactly.
Well, you know, somebody like, you know, somebody smart. I mean, it really grinds me when people say, these people are stupid. Hey, you can say what you want about Tom Cotton. He's not stupid. He's Josh Hawley is not stupid.
Yeah.
You know, these guys are smart and they are adept and they know what they're doing. And I'm worried that Trump has broken down enough of those norms. Now, I am also not worried in the sense we were talking about generational change earlier. You know, I really believe that the Trump phenomenon is a heavily generationally concentrated phenomenon. There is no second wave of Trumpists out there. And again, I say this in the way professors and social scientists shouldn't, which is to say, I have absolutely no evidence for what I just said, but it is my impressionistic belief that this is kind of an over 55 white male thing. And so I think, you know, that's my demographic and, you know, we're not going to be around forever. So I'm a little less worried about that down the line, but I think, you know, a couple more cycles of just voting out the Republican Party, a couple more cycles at least, to make clear that, you know, there are norms in American politics that we will restore by the sheer, you know, willpower of the voters. I hope. Anyway.
Yeah, it's the problem of, you know, people clinging to that imagined past, you know, that like 1950s Leave It to Beaver when it was just so good like that. And like, I mean, everybody under 55, or, you know, at least my students, they get a good, just like, you guys know old people that are like, Ozzie and Harriet's the way it was. And they're like, yes. And I'm like, are they right? And they're like, can't be. There were no black people there. And I'm like, you know, yeah, good point.
One of the things, if you really want to like blow your students' minds, especially now when we've had this gigantic national debate about police violence, you know, at dinner time, when I can't take watching the news anymore, I switch over to Me TV, you know, the nostalgia channel.
Oh, yes. I love it.
I love Me TV, right? I mean, Joe Mannix is my spirit animal. Mm-hmm. But at around dinner time, when I have to tune out the news for a while, you know what's on is Adam 12.
Oh,
and if you want to like show younger people, this is the disconnect of what's happening now versus the nostalgia of somebody who's like my age, right, in their late 50s. You know, Reed and Malloy wearing ties, you know, and taking out little cards to read everybody their rights, and I mean, it is, you know, it's a comforting fantasy. That America, you know, that we all engaged in together every Sunday night in 1968, you know, and I think it really, and I actually say this without being a slam on Adam 12, because Jack Webb, you know, was a patriotic American, thought he was putting out something great, but you know, if that's what you think America was, of course you're nostalgic, because that's ridiculous. It was the
Yeah.
Los Angeles police would never look like that.
Yeah, it's just a shame you couldn't like watch the show, but then it just rolls into the news right after the show, so you could see what
Right.
was actually happening at the same time.
Yep.
But it's like one of the things I always point out in my classes is like there's not a two-parent black family on television until the early 1970s with Good Times.
Mm.
I mean, and the whole narrative is that they are poor, right? I mean, you don't have the 1950s family on television until the 1980s with the Cosby Show. It's 30 years. What do you think when people look back at that time? Don't be surprised when they write black people out of that history, but that's not where you should get your history from. Statues and TV shows, bad places.
Nostalgia is poisonous. And I don't know. I mean, in some ways, when I was younger, I was the most nostalgic person in the world, because I was an only child and I grew up, miss my folks. And I think about, every now and then drive back to my hometown. But, the fact of the matter is, I really don't have any of that nostalgia, and I don't understand the people who do. My wife is exactly the same age as I am. And if you talk to us, we're talking to some younger kids about growing up, hey, you guys were kids in the 60s. What do you remember? And we both practically at the same time said, no air conditioning. That's what we remember.
It's hot.
We weren't out. We weren't like 8-year-olds, cheering on protesters. We were like,
you weren't at Woodstock.
Yeah, we weren't at Woodstock. And by the late 70s, what do I remember? I remember that, like, I always tell people to watch Saturday Night Fever so that they would know that there was a time when America really looked that way.
Yeah.
Like they say, oh, things are terrible. The cities are a mess. I'm like, go watch Saturday Night Fever and get back to me.
I always tell people just to compare a 1969 Mustang to a 1974 Mustang too. And I'm like, that's all you need to know.
I think that this poisonous nostalgia, it's almost like America is having a giant midlife crisis.
Well, there's one man who's having a crisis in his 70s, and we're all along for the ride. That's what it seems like. We're kind of at the whim of Donald Trump's temper tantrums and hissy fits. And
I don't think he ever intended to be president. That's always been my theory all along. I think he didn't intend to win. I think he's been miserable every day. This is also Howard Stern's theory. But I did not talk to Howard about this. We came up with it independently, and he knows the guy. But it seems to me that I think his plan was to lose by just enough to say that I was cheated, and then travel the country as the shadow president. And suddenly having to show up and do a job and be held responsible by people that he couldn't just buy off or fire has made him completely nuts. And we're all suffering for it. And I think we all ought to let him off the hook in 4 months.
Oh yeah, he can go on vacation.
It sounds to me like what you said was if you really love Trump, you wouldn't vote for him in 2020.
If you care about the man,
if you love him, set him free.
Set him free. Exactly. Exactly.
Well, you know what? We hate setting you free, Tom, but we're going to. You have been so gracious with your time, and thank you so much for doing this. It's really been wonderful evening. A great way to cap off Father's Day.
Agreed.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks so much for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you to you, and thank you to all our patrons, all our good friends, everyone. Have a good night, and take care.
And Bob needs to stick around for a minute to record something with me, so we'll let you go there, Tom.
Buggers.
Oh, yeah, Bob. All right.
Well, now this will be my my big debut as Grandpa Simpson.
There you go. You got a couple of impressions in there, too. You got, you got Trump, you got...
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you so much, man.
Have a good one.
Take care.
Take care.
All right, Bob, we got to record just a real quick intro because what's that?
Okay, wait, hold on real quick. While we have our patrons here, if you're still here, a couple weeks ago, we were talking about television shows, and someone recommended Schitt's Creek. And I'm on episode 3, and it is so awesome. And I don't know who it was. It's one of you here, or you may be gone. But anyway, I just want to thank our patrons for turning me on to that.
Yeah, and they'll get to see it too because we air the whole video of this, so they can see behind the scenes that we're going to record the intro to today's episode after we recorded the episode and not before. Yeah, here you go on the inside.
Wait, hold on. I'm on episode 3. So anyway. I'll watch
So, all right.
episode 4 after this. What do you want, Ben? What do you want?
Well, somebody changed the schedule on me. Somebody was like, "We got to air this
I
episode
did.
tomorrow,"
I
and so
did.
as the person that organizes all this, we got to record
Yeah.
something to explain this.
Okay.
So uh, basically, I've been working with Lewis Woods on this episode for like the last
Right.
week and a half. Dude, it is fire.
Yeah, but
He has interviewed 5 different people. He has interviewed scholars from psychology, from education, from international relations. And he's done like 18-minute interviews with
so
all these folks.
I've completely messed that up.
No, actually, I can air that next Monday. It's the reason that I was like,
Okay.
you ask Gary if Gary's cool with it, we can, because we're supposed to keep a bi-weekly schedule, but this will actually this will be in between, right? So
Hey, yeah.
this will work
Everybody,
out.
I thought this show tonight was next week. Like, and I booked it, and
But not like Bob found out this morning, right?
last night. Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't going to say that.
I was like, I saw a tweet. I was like, what do you mean, Tom Nichols this week? It's next week. And then I like went back and looked at the communication between Ben and I was like, oh man, it was me writing, it's 21st. Da, da, da.
Yeah, and also to be fair, I may have gotten the Joe Kwan interview wrong twice publicly.
Right. You did.
So I have not exactly established myself as a credible source. So, all right. So basically, because of this, man, and like we're working through it, man. Like it's all him, but like I'm just letting him
That's
go
great.
and he's coming tomorrow. He's recorded all 5 interviews in the course of 2 days, and he's recorded the intro, right? So like for those of you guys who are listening right now, it's part of the Pass the Mic project. And so like we offered our feed to Black scholars, to Black voices, right? To people that you guys are familiar with, at least have been on the podcast before, but just run with it. And I've been producing, editing, lending, taking all our equipment over there so that Lewis can use it, and then bringing it back over here to set up. Just to make sure he gets the best quality. He's been using our Zoom account because we've got the extra Zoom account. I told him, I said, consider that I work for you.
That's great.
So that's going to be launching, and we're going to finish it up this week. He's coming over tomorrow so we can walk through like how to kind of wrap it up. But so for those guys who are listening, basically we're going to air this episode we just recorded tomorrow, and then next Monday on our bi-weekly schedule, we're going to drop that episode. And just so you guys know, the idea is we're not going to be on it. It's not for us to be on. It's not our episode. We're not asking questions. My theory has been that Black folks have had enough questions asked of them and enough interrogation by white folks at this point. So we're literally just passing the feed and allowing people we know are smart to talk to their smart friends. And this is Lewis Woods, my colleague. I think it's episode 118. You can go back and listen to that. So I just want to introduce it and let everyone who's listening know like that's what we're doing. And then I want to put in a great word for this because he has been putting so much work into this and so much thought. And I realized it's the first time me and a colleague at MTSU have ever collaborated on anything really meaningful. And it feels really good. And he lives like a mile from me. It's been so cool. Anyway, so we're just going to record that real quick for everybody so they'll know. And we also need to hype La Cosecha. Cool?
Okay, sounds great. And Gary, this will be on the same track as what we're doing tonight, which you'll be up all night working on. So.
That's right. So I'm Ben Sawyer.
I'm Bob Crawford.
This is The Road to Now, and today's episode is an interview with Tom Nichols. Bob, you booked Tom. You give a little bit of hype up front for this one?
Sure. He's the author of The Death of Expertise, a book that came out in 2018, which was actually an expansion of an article he wrote a year before that went viral. And it's all about the death of expertise is all about, really, for me, it's how we got to this situation in this moment in our history. The idea of questioning the expert, of doubting the expert, and even of how experts did lead us astray at certain times and how that led to suspicion for expertise. But really, no better example of the death of expertise than what we witnessed this week in the run-up to the president's rally in Tulsa, where you had Anthony Fauci, the head of infectious disease for the NIH, coming out and saying, rallies that's not a good idea. You need to wear masks. This is, people aren't believing science anymore. Science is truth. And on the other hand, you had the president saying masks are optional. we're going to do this indoor rally. You know, 1 million people are going to be here. It just that dichotomy of fact and truth versus hyperbole and suspicion, and you can't tell me what to do or how to behave or to wear a mask. It's really, it really, Tom Nichols' work, really, even the articles that he writes, like we highlighted his Atlantic piece about Trump being the most unmanly president, and he even had a recent one about Trump on Twitter in the USA Today. It really highlights this suspicion of expertise and the doubt that led to or made the ground soft for a Trump presidency in the moment we're in now.
Bob, I got a question for you, and this comes down to like you being a musician and me being a comic. All right, so like you can't say 14,000 people isn't a lot of people. It's a lot of people. I mean, it's like, you know, like hundreds of thousands less than you thought you were going to get, right? I just wonder, like,
well,
as
they had 6,220.
That's how many they had?
The place holds, or 6,200, 6,220 is what the clickers, the fire department, that's what the fire department does at events. They count people. So they said you had 6,220.
And it held 19,000 people, right?
So it's like an Ava Brothers concert in one of those places. It's maybe a little better. Maybe they do a little better. Trump did a little better than the Ava Brothers did there. But that's how you know. Like the fire department, they are the source. If you want to know how many people were at this event, that's their job. Because why? Because there's a fire code and there are occupancy regulations, and so they're on site to make. Of course, if the president's coming, of course they're on site. So anyway, so there's a lot of speculation, a lot of reasons why this happened. I guess apparently a lot of high school kids went on and got tickets.
Even if they did, the point is there was overflow outside. All right. You mean to tell me that like that
Tim Wells, K-pop fans strike again.
I know that, but like that's not an excuse. They kept on getting bigger for as many people who signed up. That means that's how many people signed up because they weren't turning people away, right? Yeah. So there's no excuse for that. And they invited people inside that were outside. But my question for this was, Bob, all right, so you know, you play way bigger places than me. You do something fundamentally different. And I think that like your performance is versus stand-up, like yours is more pure, whereas like stand-ups are kind of, you know, like we can be neurotic when we're doing our thing. Sometimes you can be in front of an audience and the audience is awesome. And the place you're doing it, you know, it's like 100 people or whatever for stand-up, right? You know, bigger place. Again, I'm not the guy to talk to about huge crowds, but you be in a room that holds 100 people. 90 people show up, but you can only see the 10 empty seats. You can only see the 10 empty seats. And you can only see the 3 people not laughing. Doesn't matter how many people are laughing. You feel that way sometimes? Because if we feel this way, there's no way Trump didn't walk away from last night absolutely feeling terrible. And I can't lash out today.
Let me tell you a story. We get booked into a lot of these arenas that there's no way we're going to fill. There's just no way. I don't know why sometimes. So a number of years ago, we were in Oklahoma City, and we were where the Oklahoma City Thunder play. This holds probably 20,000 people, right? 20,000. I'm sure that's kind of like the average for those kinds of places. We had 2,500 people. And so I'm backstage thinking, man, this is going to just suck. I mean, this is going to be like, you know, why aren't we in a club? Like, why aren't we downtown Oklahoma City in a 3,000 seat venue? Like, this is ridiculous. We walk out and the crowd was so fired up and just on our side and excited that it was 20,000 people.
So you're saying you think Trump felt great about that speech yesterday?
He very well could have if he had our experience in Oklahoma City a couple of years ago.
Well, thank God it's a totally city.
He couldn't, but I could not believe it. It's almost like someone could hear my doubting and my negative thoughts, and they were like, Bob's an idiot. Like, let's just be really, really loud tonight and just be really, really excited. And it was amazing. What is on your screen, Ben?
Oh, I froze up for a second.
Okay.
Sorry.
Are you feeling better?
Oh, I feel great.
Good.
This is the last time we'll have to record like this. This is me using an Epic Cam web
No,
program.
this sounds much better. This sounds better than last week. It's great.
Okay, cool.
So
Cool. Yeah.
anyway,
So
the point was the crowd makes all the difference, and that was an amazing night. And we've had many nights in those like venues that are just, and I'm sure some of our friends here, they've been to those shows where we're in this like enormous arena, and it's just like, who thought? I mean, I know who books us, and we've been with him since 2003, and whatever. And I know there's like just the way the business, we don't do that part of the business. There's just a way that kind of, there's relationships in that business, right? So, but it's just amazing that you can be in a room and have it be that empty. But when we play, the lights are off.
you also don't have cameras and be like, pull them in closer. Get the shot over here. Get the shot over here.
When Trump plays, the lights are on. It's like a Springsteen concert. So, yeah.
I just wondered. All right, we don't have to leave that in. I just wondered because I was like, it must be eating at him. It must be eating at him so hard because he's like, you see the empty seats and there were a lot of them. Anyway, neither here nor there.
And he may start a war or do something really awful in the next couple of days just to change the subject. And
surprise, surprise.
Really horrible about that. But let me ask you about this. D.L. Hughley was in Nashville. He's on tour.
Yeah.
He passes out. He's got coronavirus.
Yep.
Who's going to shows? That's what I want to know. Who is going to shows?
I don't know, Bob. I haven't been on stage since March.
I mean, who is going to shows? Are any of you people, our 7 friends here, are you going to shows? Let me ask you this. I have a dentist appointment next Monday. I'm not going to go. I'm canceling that.
I got a dentist appointment Tuesday.
My kids.
About to break.
Are you going?
Yeah, I've got a tooth about to break. I've got a tooth about to break right here that I've been putting off for months because of this back here. And I went in and I read up on it. The dentist, dude, by the way, Bob, look at the ratings of like the safety. They look like welders. The dentist office I went into, they're wearing a full sheath. They're wearing masks, goggles with a full face shield over it. They're better protected than like NHL players.
Can I tell you, I ordered a box of face shields like Saturday on Amazon. Just that's how crazy I am with COVID in my brain. Like, my daughter has an appointment. She's got to get her AFOs, their ankle foot orthotics. She's growing out of them, and we put this off. I've put this off twice, and I'm taking her in, but we got the first appointment 8 a.m. Monday morning, and we've got it, where we're going to go around the back, and and I know the therapist, she just had a baby, so I know she's not taking any chances. Anyway, is anyone going to restaurants?
Out to eat? Yeah, they are. I mean, I've got friends that work in the restaurant industry.
Any of you guys? Are you going to restaurants, Ben? Are you and Kelly? Have you guys gone to a restaurant?
Just doing pickup. I mean, and full disclosure, cut this out of the thing, Gary. I mean, like I got offered a couple weekends at a club, and like I'm not in July, at the end of July, and I'm not doing it. Yeah, and then they've moved to an outdoor setup at the club that I got offered at, and it's easy money and it's fun, and I love the club, and I don't want to say where it was. I mean, I love it, but there's just no way that I can carry that. I mean, for what,
right.
For what?
Okay, well, this has been great.
Okay, so let's move into this. Let's move into this part that's the most important.
Oh no, we're not done.
No, we got to talk about the episode next Monday.
Oh, next episode. Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right.
Yeah. Sorry, Gary. All right. So one of the things I want to share with everybody right now is that you may have noticed that we said we were going bi-weekly on our schedule, and that this one's coming out back to back with our last week's interview with director of Michael Bonfiglio,
which we forgot to ask Tom about.
We'll let you. You can text him.
Shoot.
So
okay, go ahead.
You may have noticed that this is coming out back to back, but sorry. And you may have noticed that this is coming out back to back with last week's episode with Michael Bonfiglio. Well, we decided to air this one because it's pressing for time because it's very relevant with what's going on right now. But also, we're still going to launch one next week, and I'm really excited about it. I think Bob and I have mentioned this before, but with all the call to amplify Black voices, and we've talked about the way racism works a lot on this show. But maybe we've been guilty about the fact that we haven't really had as many Black scholars on as we should have. And so for me, I felt like given the current context of what we're going through, and the fact that if, right now we could have Black guests on, and I mean, their time is being asked. As I tweeted this, that, America in 2020 is like that student that doesn't take any notes until he finds out he's failing and then shows up in your office hours the last week and expects you to explain everything. Like our Black scholars right now are working overtime. And so there are a lot of things that went into this, but you guys may remember from episode 118, the interview I did with Lewis Woods, my colleague, Dr. Lewis Woods from the history department at MTSU, one of my most mind-blowing episodes we've ever done, and also a really popular episode. Bob and I just passed the mic to him. And I've been kind of producing and basically serving as an employee for the last week and a half. And he has produced, and we are wrapping up right now, production on an episode that's all him. And let me tell you, what I've heard so far is so good. Lewis he is a scholar of the highest standards. He is a character, a person that can really explain things in deep ways. He's confident in what he should be confident about, and he's open and honest about everything. And so next Monday, we're going to be airing that episode. You won't hear us on it, right? You won't hear us. We don't, this is to share other people's voices. And so we want you to enjoy that. And if you enjoy it, reach out to us, let us know, because, we want to keep encouraging this type of thing. How can we share our power to amplify Black voices? We've got an RSS feed, and we hope you will welcome our guests and enjoy this next Monday.
Yeah, Ben, it was a great idea by you to do this and get this started. And we took your idea over at RT and Theology last week with Liz Weiss. We're going to have her host regularly. She'll be on, every month or so. So again, tip of the hat to you, and it's a great idea. And I'm so glad that we're doing it here. And I can't wait to hear the episode.
Thanks, man. Well, enjoy this interview with Tom Nichols, and take care.
All right, everybody. Have a good night. Thank you so much. We love doing these. Next one is
Joe Kwan. July
12th.
Yeah,
11 or 12. 12.
And then Heather Cox Richardson. What's up, Heather Cox Richardson?
And the book is How the South Won the Civil War.
Yep.
So when she's 26th of July? No, wait.
She is, no,
21st.
She's the 19th. It's the 19th, right?
19th. Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for all the happy Father's Day wishes.
Yeah, thanks.
Have a good night. Take care.